Okay, buying a short-term rental is an extremely exciting time in your life. But once you buy that first one, what if you want to buy another one and then scale up a short-term rental business? It takes a lot more than just adding one property at a time.
This is a big stepping stool. I hope to do this multiple times, but I want to show you how powerful this can be. And them recognizing, okay, yes, but you're still an entrepreneur just now out on their own.
In this episode, you'll hear how our friend Eric Lewis, the owner of Nashville Stays, leveraged his network and was able to scale up his short-term rental business from that first property into a boatload of properties that he co-hosts.
And it's always been where my heart is, but it also, just conversationally, I think that's helped a ton, where it wasn't an overnight thing. It's just day after day of literature, basically.
What if you could double your portfolio overnight through a strategic acquisition? I'm 29-time Airbnb superhost Jason Muth. I'm in chapter 2 of my working career right now. I worked for the media business for a long time, 25 years to be exact, probably a little bit longer. That job ended, but I was scaling my business along the way. Since 2016, we've welcomed over 5,000 guests to the short-term rental properties that we own and co-host. And now I'm here to show you how to create a smart stay. On with the show. So Eric is the founder and owner of Nashville Stays. And if you look on the website, it's nashvillestays.com, right, Eric?
That's right.
Yeah. You'll see the properties that Eric owns. You'll learn about his business. And the avatar for who he serves is very different from who we serve here in the Northeast at some of our properties. I'm going to be in Nashville. I'm going to see Eric. Actually, I will have seen him when this comes out, because we have a big conference coming up in just a couple of weeks. And I did get a short-term rental in Nashville last time I was there, and boy, it is a very different market from the Northeast.
Yeah, for sure. It's certainly more if you think Nashville, most people think the woo girls and the bachelorette trips and bachelor trips, and that's true. And we do cater to families as well, but it really is kind of that exciting. We try to keep a good mix of still welcoming families, but we can't turn our eye to the fact that people are coming to go get rowdy on Broadway. And we certainly don't foster the party home, but we try to keep it fun and exciting for them, because while the majority are traveling. But
Yeah, I saw a few of your listings, clearly no parties, no smoking in them, but they're very brightly colored. Some of the design is just out of this world, and I want to get into that a little bit later, with memorable experiences. But you've had quite a run these past couple of years. Why don't you tell everybody your story as to how Nashville Stays came about, and when you started doing some work in short-term rentals and have evolved it into the larger business that you're running today.
sure. Yeah, so my journey started back all the way in 2020 when I purchased my first home. That's my only home, but first one too. Um, and decided I would short-term rent that, just go out of town for the weekends, and really just fell in love with kind of hacking my first purchase, and really fell in love with it then. At the time, still in my day job, I'm a licensed CPA and auditor from previous corporate life. So really just did that on the side, and did that for a few years, picked up a few friends as co-host clients, but really small, organic, not really leaning into it, not really the bread and butter. Um, but really built up the experience there. And then just word of mouth, I found myself with about 7 listings, um, at the time operating under Overnight Nashville brand, still with the day job. Fast forward to last November, I was actually laid off from that job, but luckily enough had enough of a kind of head start with the side hustle to go full time with it. From there, picked up a few more listings, but then really, like you mentioned, through acquisition, was really able to explosively grow here back in September by purchasing another company, Nashville Stays, that we've adopted their branding with, for another additional 10 listings. So really from overnight, more than doubling. It was really just, again, the same way where I was house hacking and paying my mortgage just by traveling on the weekends. I also realized you could do years worth of organic lead generation, but if you find that one lead who's already got those 10 spider webs of connections, it's really a quick way just to, you know, assumed credibility. You're technically paying for it, but for him to trust me as the purchaser to take care of his homeowners, um, it really is just a shortcut that I'm really glad that I listened to enough podcasts and had heard of it happening before to be comfortable going into that really new transaction that I'd never taken part in. But
Eric, you're not the first corporation to buy another one, right? So it's a really smart way to grow. That's how a lot of companies grow, because you reach a limit with the organic growth, in terms of revenue or additional properties. And sometimes the way to grow is to acquire. And you must have had that foresight somewhere along the way. You said you listened to some podcasts that talked about it. I do know a couple other people in our mastermind and some other folks in the business that actually have done the same exact thing, where they grew dramatically through acquisition. Talk about that process, though. You had your 7, and then how did you come about finding another company, which was Nashville Stays at the time, that you didn't own, that was interested in selling to you?
yeah, so I honestly credit it to my organic networking and marketing the same way that I came about getting those first 7 listings. And the way that I go about learning and growing is not just the daily podcast in the ears, that certainly happens, but just meeting people who are a few steps ahead of me. And so by doing that, I met this gentleman who had a lot of really cool listings and more than I did. And he was a real estate agent. So he, had more of that sales, and I wanted to learn from him. So I simply invited him out to coffee. This would have been a year before the actual business purchase happened. And again, I'm always Mr. Podcast and always have nuggets to share as well. So even though he was far ahead of me, there were some technical things or just things I saw differently that I could provide value to him. And since he was ahead of me, he would actually send me some leads for one-offs that were too small for him. They were too small for me at the time too, but still goes to show that just providing that value, I knew it would come back. And I didn't really go into it with a transactional state of mind of what will I receive back if I can tell him these nuggets. But it really just organically turned into, we hadn't been in contact much, but he would start texting me a month apart. Hey, you still doing the short-term rental stuff? How's it going for you? And finally, it started to kind of tell, like, he wants something here. So scheduled a coffee with him, and he let me know that he's ready to get out and focus more on the real estate part. And since, he always liked my growth mindset of trying to learn and what I already brought to the table, he really felt comfortable be a serious buyer, and that also it wouldn't be, a lot of these co-host clients of his are his real estate clients and continue to be. So if he just handed them off to Joe Blow, who does a horrible job, it's going to hurt his relationship as well. So really just by having that background from just organic networking at first is how it came about. As far as structuring the deal itself, we very much were just shooting from the hip on that. I think I had the most knowledge as far as I've heard people doing this on a podcast. I've heard of this. So these are the certain things we need in place. And then just started networking and calling some advisors I'd heard on a podcast. They deal with the larger guys, like the 100 plus listing acquisitions. And I just kept calling his office. Like I was below the minimum for him to even pick up that job. But I kept calling his office saying, hey, you're in Nashville, I'm in Nashville. Can I please pick your brain? Well, by the time I talked to him, we already have all the structure of the deal in place. And he basically confirms, like, wow, you kind of spitball that really well. That's some of the things I would tell you, but make sure to keep these things in mind. But
yeah, and I know we spoke before we started recording, so I know how it more or less how you structured it, but there are just a lot of different ways that people can buy another company, especially these companies that are where the real asset are the relationships. I've seen people just have simple referral agreements on their way out. People have purchased the relationships and have a whole bunch of different ways. But you actually bought his company, is that right?
yeah, that's right. So I purchased the whole LLC that he was operating under, becoming that controlling member. So each of his co-host contracts that were written to Nashville Stays LLC, they're basically then, assigned to me, if you will. And that was a lot of the legalese that we were really unfamiliar with is this contract assignable and how do we need to even draw this up? And me taking over the LLC ended up making the most sense, we think. But really at the end of the day too, no matter what relationship you set up for the transaction, you still have to have those homeowners buy in, because unless you have a 12-month binding, 12-month cancellation period, if the homeowner doesn't want you, they're not going to keep you, and vice versa. So no matter how it's legally drawn up, I think that was a bigger consideration too, was, speaking to these homeowners and giving them that confidence that they'll be taken care of. But then it was nice to know that we did have sound legal structure as far as there's now a contractual obligation.
Mm-hmm.
And with the co-hosting, it probably is a lot less messy than your traditional business purchase with heavy assets. This was essentially the contracts and an existing relationship with a cleaning team that I contractually agreed to keep on. Probably one of the missteps of the whole deal was doing that without, fully vetting. I was too worried about getting the deal of, can I purchase it?
Mm-hmm.
Not, do I want all these pieces with it? Yeah, it was interesting to navigate.
No, I mean, since the real value that you purchase are kind of the relationships with the customers there, and much like when people buy out real estate brokerages, sometimes that the sale may go through, but the existing end client has their allegiances not to the company per se, but to the people. And if the people change over, there's a risk that they're going to walk out. Is there anything that you built into your contract, your deal, to protect you from bad retention after the turnover, or people going elsewhere?
Yeah, for sure. So from what I learned to be the typical model when purchasing a management company is you do have a clawback period where you agree upon a price. On the strike date, you're going to give them a check, but then you have that contingency period. And that's exactly what we did. So um, I did I think 50-50 may be a common arrangement with the larger ones. I gave a little more upfront just because I was excited for it. Going back, I'd change some things of the levers. But that's what we did. We had an amount up front and then a certain amount of time. I believe we did 4 months kind of retention period of, if, hey, I'm Eric, hi Eric, here's the door happens, then I'm not having to pay for those. Right before the deal went through, we found out one of the houses was actually hitting the market to be sold, which also put me in a weird position of, I'm valuing these at what they're worth to me for a year, basically. And now I know this one can be gone as soon as title can do the paperwork. So that one, we actually increased that contingency period to be a year. So now it's an interesting scenario of, I know it can sell. We're going on 4 months right now. If we get to month 11 and it sells, I got the year's worth of revenue and don't have to pay for it. But again, this was all minded with, keeping these clients for at least 3 years to really make it worth it. So hoping that that real estate stays as expensively listed as it is and stays where it is. But
And I mean, is there anything that was baked into the agreement to protect the seller for his reputational relationships that he has with them in his other business, but also to make sure that you're doing your due diligence to keep these clients on for that earnout year?
yeah, so I actually was thinking about that because very much it was framed in the vision of, what if the clients leave me in this new transition? And we really didn't put much in there as far as, of course I'm going to do my best. I just paid money for these contracts, but we really didn't put any protection on his end of, what if I just like negligently, life happened to me or something and I decided I didn't want to do this anymore and put them in a bad position. We really didn't. So that's something I was thinking of, as if I'm hopefully selling 10 years down the road, is to making sure that there's protections on both aisles and not having those blinders of, this is normally who needs to be protected in this part of the contract, when most times it's going to be both ways.
So after you closed on the deal, how many of those contracts that were part of Nashville Stays are now still part of your company?
So of the 10, we ranked them in revenue and kind of the PETA factor. It's the pain in the rear factor. And number 10, the one who never wants to pay to replace broken blinds, has never painted the house, and the lowest revenue. We always said if that's the one that goes, we hope it goes. We hope that one does. And sure enough, I got that phone call like towards the end of the escrow period of, hey, I got bad news. Well, actually, good news for you, Eric, but this one client has left. So um, that reduced the purchase price, and I got rid of a headache. So it couldn't have worked better for the one that did go.
Right. And the others you retain, so you're still managing those properties.
Still managing those properties, and one of the owners has actually purchased the second home that's been put into the management. So lost one of the bad ones and got a good one. But
yeah, what are some of the strategies to introducing yourself and getting some loyalty from the people who came over in the transaction?
yeah, so a lot in the same way that I would be pitching a potential homeowner to manage for, and some of the things I was having to tell the seller, property manager, just really explaining that, I've been doing this for a while and I have, good performance to show with review ratings. I take care of my guests, I take care of my homeowners, but then also telling him, what are the next steps and kind of changes I'll be doing. And a lot of it has to do with the mastermind that Jason and I are in, the short-term rental secrets. Really just that next level of coaching, and your everyday operator won't survive now with the super compressed market of Nashville we have. So really the above and beyond things that I'm constantly elevating and leveling up in is something that really helped the homeowners be comfortable that they're not just getting a new manager, they're also getting some perks like my VA with 24/7, guest and owner communication, some more accounting portals, and basically a more robust, trust accounting can be scary to the homeowner who just gets a statement each month, but giving them more real-time reporting, and instead of searching the emails for last quarter's report, actually having a central place to go do it. Um, and just basically anything I would be pitching a new homeowner with, you're basically having to reset that with them, because that's exactly what they're getting is a new property manager relationship.
Mm-hmm. You said you bought your first place in 2020, or your only investment. Was that right?
That's right.
Yeah. You just sound so wise beyond the years of having done this for just a handful of years, which is astounding because you did this on the side for a couple of years. We did it on the side too. It was our side hustle from what, Rory, 2016 is when we bought that first place till
I would say
2022.
16 to 20 is our side hustle phase. And then after 20 was the professionalization of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were professional for those other years. Like, we certainly weren't taping things together and, just not treating our guests well. And we the reviews to show. But to your point, yeah, I mean, like, I worked a professional full-time W-2 job until 2022, shortly before the conference that I first met Eric at in September of 22. But, those last couple of years at that job, we were, thinking about this transition, when it was going to be. But yeah, I mean, I'm thinking if your first place was, I mean, not even 4 years ago, really. Depends on when you bought it, 2020, and now you're able to speak to this level. It shows how all in you've gotten, and really how refined you've probably brought your mindset into the operations of your business. Talk about when you felt like you were actually, that you knew what you were doing. Like, when along that way? It could have been day one, like, pound your chest, I'm proud, I know this stuff, or it could have been somewhere along the way. Like, what was that evolution like?
Yeah, so probably two different phases of kind of maturing. So doing it on my own house for over a year, you pretty much see all the different curveballs that the guests can throw at you, the different things that can go wrong with the homes. Really getting my feet wet there. And your last podcast guest, his name escapes me, but I was listening to some of that, and he mentions being the worst employee that his last boss had. I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but I literally am always listening to a podcast about real estate or short-term rentals, and it's been that way for years and years. and it's just always been where my heart is. But it also, like, just conversationally, I think that's helped a ton, where it wasn't an overnight thing. It's just day after day of literature, basically. So pairing that together with getting to run my own house as a short-term rental, that gave me the confidence to talk to any homeowner of, here's what to expect. Here's what I do to make all those kind of headaches not your problem, and how I handle them. So really, after the first year, I think, was that, maturation point. Whenever we talk more enterprise and being a professional management company, for a long time it was, I feel like I'm just a good property manager, not necessarily a great property management company. However, once I was able to go full time, that certainly helps in my sales pitch to say, this is what I live and breathe. This is what I wake up and do every day. But it's not just a sales, tactic to say. It's really true. Whenever this is the day in, day out, like what I do to bring dinner home, that really just gave that second level of confidence. And continuing to invest in education and being in this mastermind group, I'd say was the next part that makes me comfortable in front of any room. There's a large investment to join that, but the education and peer space of getting to be in the room with, like, our coaches, for example, who they would go to Congress and talk short-term rentals, just to see that confidence exude in them. I think really mirroring that and just trying to follow in those footsteps was kind of that next level. And to be completely honest, after I purchased the business, it's a constant theme that I tell my wife, like, what I just did there felt easy, not in like I'm not growing sense, but like I always think of, if just the everyday, like someone with a regular 9 to 5 punches out, surely they would pull their hair out at what I just went through with ease there. And after the business acquisition, I think that was a specific example where people in the coaching calls are interested and want to learn from me to hear in that. And that's just rocket fuel for my own confidence to know, like, I did do something difficult and I am knowledgeable on this. I need to act and to be that. And I think it really just helps from a mindset perspective to really believe it and feel it. But
Yeah. And think back to when you were working in that W-2 job and you said you got laid off from that position. Did you think that this was going to be the next thing for you? Like, were you already at kind of 1 foot into this world? I know you had your one property, but was there at any point a decision that you were going to go look for another job doing the work that you were doing? Or was it like, nope, this is my next thing, I'm all in?
yeah, so only had 7 at that time, but luckily the revenue from even those 7 plus the one house I owned, I had to sit down and do the math with the severance package and what my kind of outlay for future revenue was. I did have to, that was kind of a nervous exercise, but we're talking the day I got laid off doing this.
Mhm.
And before I called my wife, or that is now wife, to let her know about that, I waited till the end of the day, not to, worry her while she's at work. But by the time I called her, I realized that not once did I start to go on monster.com or get the resume ready. And instead it was, make sure I have the numbers to support this, but we're doing this. We're going full time. This was before the business purchase was even, a twinkle in my eye, if you will. But even then I knew that this was going to be the jumping off point, that, the business purchase really helped financially. Like, I wish that came sooner,
Mhm.
but never was going back to corporate an option, not because I hated working, just because I knew that this needs to be the start of the next chapter. And that, not to like sound corny, but this needs to be the first day of the rest of my life. Like,
Mhm.
it was always day one.
You could not answer this if you don't want to, but talking about the purchase of a company that had, these 10 contracts, how do you do that? Like, did you get an SBA loan? Did you have money saved up? Is it owner financed? Some combination of those things? What did you do and what kind of advice would you give to other people that are considering this?
Yeah, so mine was a mixture of my own funds saved up, as well as a private loan from someone in my circle. And I got really great terms of, a few years of interest free with a 5-year term to pay it off, but on a 20-year amortization, knowing just, that this person has bought in to the same idea that I'm telling him here, is that, this is a big stepping stool. I hope to do this multiple times, but I want to show you how powerful this can be. And them recognizing, okay, yes, but you're still an entrepreneur just now out on their own. You're not going to be, raking it in the very first year from this purchase. So they gave me some runway with the favorable amortization period, just really as confidence that, in the same exact way that I had to convince these homeowners that I'm the right guy, that I'm going to take care of them, it's doing the same thing to convince my wife, to convince this private money lender, to convince myself. Like, it all boils back to that confidence of having the education and experience. But once they buy in, then they're playing ball with me, and it really opens up to what's possible in the future, opposed to your traditional, I made a few cold calls, got a co-hosting lead, then we started, one at a time, like that, to really see pulling together who and what's at your fingertips. It's just a great way to multiply. But long form answer.
Talk about the support that you received or did not receive from your fiance at the time, when you told her that you were planning on doing this.
Yeah. So, referring to staying full time or the purchase?
The purchase and going full time, both those are two big decisions.
Yeah. So really, for both of them, I think part of the maturing process I've had to go through of switching from, a 6-figure W-2, it really allows me to, have a steady income now that I'm full-time entrepreneur with slow seasons and heavy seasons. My income does this now. And that's something that I never had to specifically address when I had the 6-figure 9-to-5 job. She's never had a variable income, and instead has always been the W-2. Her father is an accountant, retired early, saved a ton, like just very traditional, not go for the few big knockout swings like I do to build the business, but builds it slow over time. So it was really a framing of mindset to showing her, we will still have the traditional comfort that you're used to from an income standpoint. Like, here's the projections for my house I own. Not many things can take that away from us. That's our baseline. Here's what happens if we perform 25% to our projections with our current clients only. And really just breaking it down to her, where, of course, I can tell you the 10 years from now goal and what it all looks like when I'm all said and done. But I really had to break that down for her to show her that there are stepping stones to get to that path, where maybe if it wasn't a relationship or someone I had to communicate all this with, sometimes I'm bad about, just knowing it all works out in the end. So it's really, really helpful to have to, convince her, because I think a lot of that are things that I need to be remembering as happy-go-lucky Eric just charges into the horizon.
So when you were laid off, you had the 7 contracts, or you had yours and then the 6 that you were managing. That was in place already?
Right.
Okay. So if you were not let go from that job, would you have grown that one by one? Would you have looked to acquire a company like you did?
I think maybe if the purchase comes my way, it still would happen. But I was, there was a lot more left in the tank where I could have kept the 9-to-5 and still just slowly, one by one, added those contracts. And I think that would have just been a shame if that's what happened. Like, I was continually bumping up to that edge of not giving my all at the 9-to-5 because I'm just with 7 properties running around crazy. So I was really starting to kind of redline what I could do to juggle both. But I think I sadly would have done it for multiple more years. So had the layoff not happened, I think I would have just stayed the path. And I think it would have significantly expanded my timeline of what I've been able to do.
Yeah. When my job ended, we had 2 live. A third was about to launch. A fourth was being built. Like, the hammers weren't swung yet, but a couple weeks later they were. And then the 5th we didn't know about. Those are the 5 that we own. I look at it now, I don't know how I would have worked in that position with these five. It just, I think it would have been impossible. I mean, like, granted, there are some weeks that are heavier than others with the work that I do on the properties, and you can probably attest to that. But you brought something up about, how giving it your all, right? Like, how much would you have been able to devote to your position? And, some people, we kind of went through a period of quiet quitting, right? That was a term the past couple of years. Uh, I've heard lots of people working remotely for two companies at the same time, not telling one about the other. We've read those articles where you could make bank, but you're kind of doing a disservice to each company. There is a degree of like fairness to our employers, right? And the people that we worked for and they hired us to do a job. And if you're listening to this and you're in that job and you are trying to find your side hustle and make it your full-time thing, I think there's a moral obligation that people have to people that are paying a full-time salary. I always felt that I gave it my all at my old company. You probably did too, but there was that strain on our time, right? There are those phone calls that happen during the 9 to 5 where you're like, oh man, I got to deal with this, but I also have to deal with this. It's a struggle.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think I read an article where someone had 3 jobs, like you mentioned. I was impressed by that. But no, it was true. I mean, it luckily set forward kind of the growth path I needed to be on anyway, of hiring an assistant and really formalizing to really see just how much I could do with that 9 to 5 job still. But it's just impossible to not get that phone call or to have to call a plumber back during the work hours where, I wouldn't say I was like a horrible employee and not earning my salary. I was earning my salary, but it was very clear that I had no trajectory there if I was going to keep, one hand here, one hand here. How could I go 100% in one direction if I'm literally being drawn between the two? But
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a good transition point away, had it been my decision was going to be later on in the year of 2022. That was really my plan. I've talked about it on this podcast. But they just beat me to the punch by a couple months. But I already had it in place that I could replace what I was earning with what I was already earning on the side with our properties. The beauty of working the full-time job and doing that is you're kind of double, right? You have all that income coming in.
yeah,
So when that ended, I had to build that back up with the other properties that we brought on, and we managed to do that last year, which is great. Like my goal number one for my first full year of doing this, which was 2023, was to get back to that level, replace all of that income, add it to what I already had, and then have that all-in number, regardless of expenses, but have the all-in top line number be where I was. And I surpassed that, which is good. So, I've kind of made next goal in my head for this year, for the next level up. I have so many questions I'm going to ask you in Nashville, not on this podcast, but just about building a business. Cause we launched this Prideway Stays. Can't really see it. But that's serving Provincetown, with short-term rental co-hosting, something I said I was never going to do when I joined this mastermind. They ask us questions like, what are your goals? What do you want to do? Where do you want to be? And I said, I just want to operate my properties, meet people, and learn how to do it. And then here it is a year and a half later, and I'm doing what you did. I think it's
yeah,
infectious, right?
yeah. No, I think it's the fishbowl syndrome too of, wow, I've got a nice spot here, until you see you're placed in that next fish tank, and it's just
Yeah.
you grow to meet the environment that you're in. And I think a lot of my path was the same as you mentioned. I was able to recoup that 9 to 5 income level a lot thanks to that business purchase. But now it's got me to the point where it's okay, great, I met that arbitrary goal. Now it's how can I really streamline my lead process, my sales funnel, my onboarding, all these things that are just prohibitive to me to do all these things myself. How can I build the team out, build the process out so that I can really now have my next ambitious goal that, I feel it was that first goal of replacing that 9 to 5 income. It kind of matches that. This is the money I myself was making. How can I myself make that amount of money being a property manager, to where now we're able to take that next step to how can I now make enterprise property management company level incomes and growth, and to really elevate out of myself, because it's not my 9 to 5 to replace anymore. Now it's the company's bottom line, and the company's total portfolio. And it's just really exciting to get out of that individualist mindset and now see it as the company that it is.
Yeah. So what's the direction? Where are things headed for Nashville Stays?
Yeah, so a lot of what we're doing is a lot of what I've just mentioned there is really just solidifying all of our processes that we have in place and really building out the team. Where previously I've gotten away with, a VA that is my, task oriented type assistants, elevating even that to being really like an operations manager role, to where it's not just here is deliverable I need, but it's actually running some of the day to day and taking some of the actual organizational type tasks away from me so that I can focus more on acquisition and look ahead to what's next, whether that's individual properties or purchasing more properties or purchasing more companies. Once that first one's under the belt, it really frees you up to see what's for sale out there and, how you can go about it and what to do different on the second time around.